Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mo. I'm a pharmacist and I'm currently majoring in safety assessment of xenobiotic and biotechnological products / toxicology. So my job in the future is to make sure and safety assess the xenobiotic or the foreign materials and how can they affect the human body, and make sure we put an regulation and limit safety limits for this xenobiotic to not harm the human population. So before starting this video, let's get sciencey. That will do it. We all heard about the company called Valisure and their latest report about the existence of benzene in sunscreen. This company's goal is to make sure that the pharmaceutical products are safe for human consumption, and they regularly do analysis for pharmaceutical product that exists in the market, and they make sure that they meet the safety limits. Their latest reports on May 25th, that is 2 days ago, state that there is a high concentration of benzene in the sunscreen that they tested. So in the report by the company Valisure, they said they tested about 294 product of sunscreen sprays and after sun exposure product, and they found that 78 product out of those 294 tested positive for benzene, with concentration ranging from 1 particle per million and above, and that accounts for 27% of these tested products that tested positive for benzene. So what does that all mean to us as a consumer and users of sunscreen? So to understand everything easily, I will divide the video into 4 sections. The first section is what benzene actually is. The second section is where can we find benzene. The third section is the case of existence of benzene in sunscreen and what does this mean. And the fourth section is my professional and personal advice to you. What are you supposed to do from now on? So let's start with the first section of the video. What actually is benzene? Benzene is an organic compound made up of 6 atoms of carbon and 6 atoms of hydrogen, forming a ring, as you can see here in the picture. This compound is an aromatic compound, which means it gives you a smell and can evaporate really easily and give this distinctive smell. It's partially responsible for the distinctive smell when you pass by the gas station. It gives the gasoline that smell, or that unique smell. The natural sources of this compound is the crude oil, and the human resources are especially by the human industry activity, especially the petrochemical industries. So the second part in this video, we will talk about where we can find benzene. Benzene exists literally everywhere. We are exposed to benzene on the daily basis, from cigarette smoke, industrial smoke, the smoke that comes out of the car, and we can find it, don't be surprised, food and beverages. Yes, soft beverages. There is a concern about the existence of benzene in soft beverages, and the FDA actually released a statement about this concern in 2018. I will link it down below if you want to read more about it, that there is some occurrence of benzene in soft drinks. And the most shocking one, scientists and NASA find benzene on Mars. So benzene exists everywhere. We are exposed to it in the daily basis under heavy regulation and safety limits. And now into the third part of the video, the main part, the existence of benzene in sunscreen. I will start with a few questions. Is it bad that there is benzene in sunscreen? My short answer is yes. The second question, do we need to stop using sunscreen? My short answer is no, because we also know for sure after studies and studies that the UV is a carcinogen factor for the human, so please keep using your sunscreen. And my third question is, should I stop using a sunscreen that tested positive in the Valisure report and study? In my opinion, put it aside, stop using it, put it aside, and wait for more information to come about this situation. So if you have a product that is on the list of the product that tested positive for benzene, stop using it for now and look for sunscreen that that tested negative and keep using sunscreen, because we know that the UV is a carcinogen as well. So in toxicology, to understand the Valisure article and study and the existence of benzene in the sunscreen, we need to understand one thing. The existence of a toxicant in a product, or we are exposed to it, doesn't mean that we are in danger. That's for sure, because if a product is, or the chemical is a hazard for us, doesn't mean it poses risk on a human. There is difference between risk and hazard, because when we study a chemical to understand if it's cause risk to human or not, we not only study the concentration of this chemical, we study also the route of exposure, the period of exposure, the actual dose that reaches the circulation, the systemic circulation, and the time of exposure. There is a lot of complicated and so many factors that can affect a chemical from being risky or not. So let's take an example from the Valisure article and study, where they tested one of the product that is called Nitrogene Ultra Sheen Weightless Sunscreen Spray SPF 70, and they tested that it contains about 5.96 particle per million. The safety limit that is set by the FDA and the EU is 1 particle per million. If we converted the 1 particle per million to grams, just to make sure show you how much the amount is, it's converted to 0.0000596 grams. I converted it to grams not just to show you that the amount is small, because in toxicology we know that the concentration is not everything. Some toxicant can have a detrimental effect on the human body with concentration in picograms and nanograms, but to show you the amount that they found in this product. And according to the EU regulation, I will talk about the EU regulation because I'm currently studying toxicology and safety assessment in Italy, so I measure especially in the regulation when it comes to the EU. In the EU regulation, they stated the safety limit for occupational, and please focus on occupational, safe limit for benzene is 1 particle per million. What does occupational mean? That means that this safety limit is made for workers that are in direct contact with benzene, and this direct contact is not only dermal, but it is oral and also inhalation, because oral and inhalation are considered the main route of exposure, and dermal is considered as well, but there is a catch here. The catch is, according to the Annex 1 for benzene in the European Union, the benzene that is tested for dermal exposure, especially for the occupational part of the safety limit, the benzene that was tested is liquid benzene or solution benzene with contact to the skin. When we talk about benzene, we are talking about the existence of particle per million in sunscreen, not a pure liquid benzene that we are exposed to. So now I will read you the statement by the European Chemical Agency through the Annex 1, and I will read it off my paper when I did my research about this case, because to avoid any error or any mistakes. The European Chemical Agency state the following: the exposure to liquid benzene, which is a pure benzene, through dermal route, the absorption can happen, but the benzene evaporates really quickly because it has a high vapor pressure value. Although this stated, the skin route of exposure is still considered in special cases, such as the immersion of a skin in solution of benzene. So what the agency is saying, that the route of dermal exposure is still considered a very important route to increase the benzene burden in the human body, but there is like conditions, a specific condition when this will happen, especially if we immerse our hand, for example, in a beaker full of benzene solution for a long period of time. This dermal exposure can be then considered a very significant part of increasing the benzene burden in the human body. And according also to the European Chemical Agency, the uptake of benzene through the skin is 5.85% with a concentration of 1 particle per million. And when they calculated the steady rate of uptake by the skin, they found it ranges between 200 and 400 microgram per centimeter cubic per hour. From the value I just told you about, we can understand that the route of dermal exposure to benzene is considered significant, but in a specific condition. Especially, we need to understand that in toxicology, not the concentration, like I said before, is not everything. We need to know the, for example, the condition of period of exposure, so how much time the benzene stayed in contact with my skin, and the surface area, for example, for the benzene that I sprayed the benzene for a very large surface area will be different from applying to a small patch of the skin. So all this condition can be affecting very significantly the dermal exposure to benzene. So to understand now, will it kill me if I use this product that contain the benzene, the sunscreen that contain benzene? Will I have like a negative side effect or some acute toxicity or chronic toxicity? The short answer is no, because the lethal dose 50 of the benzene through dermal exposure is considered to be 8,260 milligram per kilogram. That means compared to the amount that exists in the sunscreen, which is for example the Neutrogena example that we talked about, is 5.96 milligram per kilogram. And in the Annex 1 by the European Chemical Agency, they stated that the dermal exposure on human and on animal didn't cause any neurological effect. And I want to share also an important information that I found during my research journey for this case. I found that in the European risk assessment report for benzene, and in this risk report they found the following, and I will quote it so I don't make any mistakes. They found in this risk assessment for benzene report a very interesting factor about the dermal exposure, and I quote, "Benzene is easily absorbed after inhalation and skin contact. Internal body burden after dermal exposure are generally low because of the rapid evaporation of benzene, and only a prolonged exposure might pose a risk. For prolonged dermal exposure and inhalation exposure at level below 1 particle per million, the only concern are for mutagenicity and carcinogenicity," which means what we can understand from this, that the dermal exposure can be limited unless there is a prolonged period. Like I said before, in toxicology, it's not about the concentration, it's about a very complicated and wide amount of factors, the period of exposure and the concentration of the benzene, for example, in sunscreen, and the period of exposure. So we need a long exposure to consider the dermal route as a significant way to increase the body burden of benzene. And now lastly to the last part, what is my personal and professional opinion about this case? I will divide it for 5 advices. The first advice I want to talk about is that you keep using your sunscreen unless it is tested positive for benzene and you find your sunscreen on the report by the Valisure company, and because we know for sure that the UV is a carcinogen factor for humans. And the second advice that I can give you as a toxicologist is to wait for update from the FDA, because the FDA needs to do its own research and analysis. They cannot rely only on reports from a third-party company like Valisure to do a wide action, for example, like take away this product from the market. Advice number 3 is the following: you don't need to be afraid if you used a product that exists on the list and it's tested positive for benzene. A one-time usage or a whole bottle of usage for the majority of cases will not cause you any harm. But if you are still using it, put it aside, like I said, and turn your attention to a negative tested sunscreen that doesn't contain any benzene for now. My 4th advice is that we need more studies about the existence of benzene in a product, and especially the contamination of product by benzene, because all the studies and the regulation were stating that the occupational safety limit for workers that are in direct contact with the pure benzene or with high level of benzene, not with the sunscreen that is contaminated with benzene. So we don't know how the sunscreen as a product can affect the dermal exposure to benzene. For example, the sunscreen can increase the dermal exposure according to a study the Valisure report cited, but we don't know how this will affect on the long run, or how this will give you or increase the absorption of benzene to reach the systemic circulation. For example, sunscreen has vehicle that may increase the absorption of benzene, but also, for example, sunscreen has also a film forming agent that can make a film that halt the dermal exposure of benzene and reduce the amount that we absorb. And there's also the temperature. There is a lot of factors that can affect the dermal exposure of benzene. For example, the heat, maybe we are exposed to the sun, the temperature of the skin can increase to, for example, to 30, and the benzene can be evaporated really quickly. Also, where they found benzene mostly in spray form, this spray form can also decrease the amount of dermal exposure to benzene that can help benzene evaporate quicker and don't reach the skin. There is very a complicated factor that can affect this case specifically. And my 5th advice is the following. It's not really an advice, but an observation I made when I read the Valisure report about the existence of benzene in sunscreen. When I read it, I felt it will call the language used and the citation and some comparison that is done by this report will cause a lot of fear and horror to the consumer that will read it. For example, I take this comparison that is made by the Valisure company. They compared benzene to NDMA. NDMA is another compound, a contamination compound that exists in drugs that are taken orally, specifically drugs called statins. Statins are drugs taken orally by a patient for lowering the amount of cholesterol in the blood. They are taken for a long period of time. The comparison used in a very fear-causing way, because NDMA is not benzene, and the rule of exposure is different. NDMA as a contaminant are ingested orally, like for a long period of time, and the benzene that we are talking about is on dermal exposure, and we don't know the dermal absorption and all the study that needs to be done, and we are lacking this information. And they use the same safety limit of NDMA, which is 96 nanogram per day, and they converted to say, okay, NDMA has this safety level and the benzene should have this same safety level, and they came up with that the usage of sunscreen with 6.28 particle per million can expose us to a safety level, to a benzene above the safety level by 7,000, and I will put the number right here. So this comparison is like, I'm not really happy to see it, because like I said, NDMA is not benzene. NDMA has a different metabolic pathways in the body than benzene, and the route of administration is different. NDMA is ingested orally, and the benzene we are exposed to it in this case with sunscreen is dermally, and we lack the information about if the dermal exposure is significant enough to cause a concern or not. We need to wait for updates from the FDA and the FDA to do these studies to understand, is there a really high risk of benzene in this concentration in sunscreen. That's why I ask you to just avoid using it for now. Don't throw it away. We need a lot of more information that studies about the absorption through cosmetics product and the absorption through for example sunscreen, how sunscreen can affect the benzene absorption, how the sunscreen in a spray form can have a different effect than cream or lotion. So all of this can have an effect on the dermal exposure. So that was my video for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and provided you with some kind of relief and space to think about the situation. This situation is not good, it's not super bad. It's something that we need to deal with and do more research about. And for the time being, please be safe. Use your sunscreen that is tested negative, and keep, of course, using and applying sunscreen, because like I said for the third time in this video, UV is a known carcinogen for human body. So I will see you in the next week, maybe with some updates on this case. And please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and share it with your friend who are obsessed with sunscreen, so they don't have to stop using sunscreen after this incident. And of course, I want to tell you that there is a big chance that the fear mongering about sunscreen will increase in the next few weeks because of this report. And please don't be afraid of sunscreen. Sunscreen are heavily tested. They are considered drugs in many parts of the world, and they are under heavy regulation and safety limits and layers of protection. So please keep using your sunscreen, and I see you in the next week. Bye.